You're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy Focus.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy Focus Football. My name is Daniel Dopp, here with my two best friends, Stephania Bell and Fields Yates.
You know what? I listened to the show on Thursday.
I have a lot of best friends,
And
Stephania.
you
Don't put me
said,
on the spot.
I'm with my two best friends.
I have a lot
I
of
was
best
like, wait,
friends.
I'm not there.
Well, it's because if you would have been here, I would have said I'm with my three best friends. That's why, obviously.
Here's the actual deal, Stephania. And I'm going to say it quietly into the mic because you never know if he's actually watching this show. You know, it's been a rough year for Mike Clay.
It's been tough.
You know, it's just been tough. Just in general.
His fantasy
Right.
teams aren't doing well.
So we
He's
need to
not
kind of lift
happy
him up a
about
little
Alan
bit.
Lazard.
Exactly.
Right. We need to lift him up. Lazard, another A-plus performance last night. Honestly, like, you guys know how coaches give game balls after wins? Jeff Ulbrich, the new Jets head coach, gave Lazard a game ball after last night. He was like, I know that we sucked, but you were great.
You were awesome.
So anyways, so Daniel does that. It's sort of like an olive branch to Mike
Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
for the rest of the stuff that we're going to say.
It's in part, yeah, because I say a bunch of mean stuff after I say that, which is what it's worth. So,
So
like,
my ego feels better.
I don't say mean stuff
'Cause
about you.
I had a rough Sunday.
I know you did. Hey, listen, I think a lot of people had a rough Sunday. We're going to get into that because not everything was all sunshine and rainbows here in Week 7. There were a handful of great performances that we will dive into.
Yep.
We're talking studs and duds, as well as a couple of quick takeaways and some injury updates. But if you guys don't mind, really quickly first, I just want to say this. Happy birthday to my son, Manny.
Aww.
Manny, I came into your life when you were 15 years old. You are now 20. I have no idea where those 5 years went, man. It has been so unbelievable to be your dad over those last 5 years. I know that you're not a big sports fan. You don't watch this show. Mom is probably making you watch it right now, but I really appreciate it every time you come in the room and you say, how's the football going? Because I know you're just trying to like reach out and like have this olive branch. I promise I'm going to finish The Witcher 3 soon. But I just want to say this to you. I love you, buddy. I'm so glad to be in your life, and happy 20th birthday, my friend.
So the countdown is on, Manny. 1 year from now,
That's
you
right.
can reach your dad's level. 1.5 seltzers will do enough to
That'll be it.
put you over the edge. A little light buzz light buzz leads to a little hangover the next day.
A little hard cider.
A little hard cider. Yes,
That's
exactly.
right. You're a cider
Yeah,
guy.
I'm a
You are
cider
a
guy.
cider
Yeah.
guy, yeah.
So, but anyways, very excited to be able to talk about a whole bunch of stuff today. Let's get into our Week 7 takeaways, and I want to start with the
guess
team.
where.
Go Waste. Go for us. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I want to
I was
start
saying,
with.
Let me guess.
Oh, let me guess. Sorry, I wanted to make sure that I
Sorry.
heard you correctly. My apologies.
We're having a good day.
Dude, anytime a team takes down a 5-0 team, you want to be thrilled about it. My Detroit Lions, holy smokes, I'm wearing my Jake Bates jersey. Congratulations to you, Jake Bates, coming out and absolutely crushing it this week as a game-winning field goal. Dude, talked about being a bricklayer coming into the season, and now all of a sudden he's kicking game-winning field goals for the Detroit Lions, but that's not the guy we're here to talk about. I just wanted to give my guy a
You're
little bit
wearing
of
his
love.
jersey, though.
You know what? I just want to say this.
His old jersey.
This is the jersey. I was so on
It's
the Jake
bigger
Bates
than Penny
bandwagon.
Sewell's, though.
It is a little bigger than Penny's. I was so on the Jake Bates bandwagon. I bought this in the preseason when his number was 43 before he changed it to 39. And obviously, once you wear a jersey, you can't return it or exchange it at the NFL shop. So this just means that I'm OG Jake Bates fan. That's what that's
part
all
of the
about.
fan club through and through.
But we had two awesome performances. Running back 1 on the week, Jahmyr Gibbs. Holy smokes, Jahmyr Gibbs was unbelievable this week, guys. 15 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns, plus 4 receptions for 44 yards for 32 fantasy points. The Vikings had given up the fewest points to opposing teams' running backs coming into this game. He saw at least 7 defenders in the box on 14 of his 15 carries and averaged 7.7 yards per carry on those plays. Dude, his lowest fantasy output coming into the week was 12.1 fantasy points, unbelievably high floor. He's had at least 16 fantasy points in every other game so far this year. I mean, he was full Sonic on display. Jahmyr Gibbs locked in as an RB1, I feel like, for your fantasy squad, in part because of that elevated floor that he has been able to have.
He was awesome.
He was unbelievable.
He was not alone, by the way, in his awesomeness.
He was not the only one that was awesome, though. I just want to say the other takeaway really quickly. His teammate, Amon-Ra St. Brown, sometimes people have been a little frustrated because the target share has not been there like we had thought it was going to be in years past, right? Wide receiver 14 in targets this season heading into the game, but he's finding the end zone more often. 20 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. He's wide receiver 7 in fantasy points. He had 8 targets, 8 receptions for 112 yards and a touchdown for 25.2 fantasy points. Wide receiver 1 on the week. Anytime you have a wide receiver 1 and running back 1 from the same team, it means you know things are going well for the offense.
Tell you what, crazy enough, that is the 4th time, if that holds, and Derrick Henry has not yet played.
Yes.
So
Yes,
he
we'll
is
see how
not
that
yet
goes.
Into the chat. We'll
Exactly.
see. But if this holds, it'll be the 4th time in the last 15 years that a single team has had a running back and a wide receiver lead their position in fantasy points in the same week.
Wow.
The last time it happened? Last week with Sean Tucker and Chris Godwin. But still,
Stop. That's
only the
amazing.
4th
like,
time
how
in
did you even
15
know that
years.
stat?
Yeah,
I'm
random
impressed.
important stuff is very much baked into my brain. Wide receiver 7 for the season for Amon-Ra in total points?
In fantasy points per game.
Points per game.
Yeah,
Okay.
because we had a bye week. there in week
I
5.
was curious. I wouldn't be surprised if that number creeps even a little bit.
I
further up.
would not
The
be
Lions
surprised
proving
either.
to be one of those few teams that can have multiple fantasy stars when everybody worries in the preseason about there's too many mouths to feed and
Yep.
how are we possibly going to pick? Why would you want to draft? Oh, here's one. Next year when we're having this conversation, I don't know if I want to take 2 players from the same team. Is that too much investment on my fantasy lineup? Bet you'd be pretty happy if you had both Amon-Ra and Jahmyr Gibbs. Remember how last year I did?
Yeah,
And
I
won
do
the
remember
Roaring
that.
League,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
combo. You know how I don't this year and I'm not doing so well?
You know,
Yeah.
you were an early adopter of the strategy, Stephania, obviously. And then people were like, well, it's a copycat league. Everyone
is.
wanted to be able to do what you did. And shout out to Jared Goff, because Jared Goff is not a guy that we've been thinking about as like a true fantasy player. His last 3 weeks, he has completed 85% of his passes. Just from an NFL perspective, he has been unbelievable. 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, only 10 incompletions. He almost has
Didn't
as
he have
many
a perfect
touchdowns
game
as
the other
incompletions.
time.
He
Was it
did.
like
Yeah.
18 for 18 or something ridiculous.
He did go 18 for 18
Yeah.
3 games ago for
Yeah.
the Detroit Lions. Yeah.
It's amazing to me that
Insane.
you can have any NFL game with no incompletions in the league that it is.
It's unreal.
He's unbelievable. He was awesome.
Not everyone has been awesome, though, not just from the Lions, but just in the rest of the week.
Yeah, I like the fact that you're
Let's start with
starting
a
off the
positive
show
note,
Yeah.
right?
with something nice to say. Because that's the only nice thing to say about Week 8, people. Week 7. My goodness gracious. If you're down this morning, I want you to know you're not alone. There are many of us out there that were sitting here crying, wondering last night, why do I play this game? Why do I draft players that are good at their job? Why do I draft wide receivers that are really freaking awesome? Or tight ends that are awesome? Why do I do this? Why would I ever do that? Why would I not just draft defenses like the Broncos or kickers
That's right.
like the Will
Jake
Rikers of the
Bates.
world or Jake Bates? Why not draft them? Because yesterday was pass catcher Armageddon. Let's put some numbers and some names to that description because, good Lord, it was ugly. Travis Kelce went off yesterday relative to the rest of the guys on this list. He had 4 catches for 17 yards.
Ugh.
Jackson Smith and Jigba, Sam Laporta, Jayden Reed, Deontay Johnson, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Jamison Williams, and Tank Dell all had fewer fantasy points than Travis Kelce's 5.7. If you double dipped on the Dolphins wide receivers yesterday,
Yikes.
you got 2 catches for 19 yards. That's 3.9 fantasy points. And I take that back because there might have been an extra run somewhere in there. I think Jalen Waddle had a 4-yard run as well. Yesterday was an absolute disaster of the highest order. I was looking at some of the scores in a couple of the leagues that I play in that have victory points. And normally when you're looking at your own score, you have a general sense of about what you need to win in the victory scoring side of the bracket in a given week. And there's a league where I'm thinking, I'm like, my team, like, I need a miracle tonight, but I feel like my score is also pretty low in general. And then I went and checked the rest of the league, and I'm like, oh, wait, Bloodbath City everywhere. Now, listen, some of these guys are going to bounce back, right? Deontay Johnson's been really good. He does feel like a guy that should be screaming to be traded. Jayden Reed's been awesome as well. Travis Kelce's still going to be started at wide receiver. Tua could be back as soon as next week. Better days are ahead for Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. Some of these, though, make absolutely no sense whatsoever. Tank Dell,
Dell,
0 catches.
I had
Brutal.
to double check it because I didn't watch that whole game, and I was like, that can't be inaccurate. I thought it somehow hadn't loaded.
Yeah.
And then I went back.
Like
and
the
watched.
website
I
was wrong for some reason.
And by the way, we didn't even include the guys who may have started the game and left early, or in the case of Deebo Samuel, who the
Dang.
team announced a few hours before kickoff that he was dealing with an illness,
Yeah.
but he was going to play. He played 4 snaps.
Yep.
He came out in street clothes in the second half. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but when the
He
team
was
says, hey, he's sick and he's going to play, like, I don't begrudge the fantasy manager who's like, I have the audacity to play Deebo Samuel. Meanwhile, if I told you that it could be Deebo Samuel with no Jawan Jennings and no Brandon Ayuk for much of that game. We'll dive into that a little bit later. You'd be saying to yourself, of course I'm starting him. Just a disaster Sunday for pass catchers. Some of these guys more confusing than others. Again, I do think the likes of Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill and Deontay Johnson and Jalen Waddle have better days ahead. Devontae Smith as well. But if you're out there and you maybe scrape by with like a 90-87 win this weekend, congratulations. But if you scored 55 fantasy points this week, I just want you to know we're here for you. We are in this thing together.
Yeah.
It was a disaster. We're going to do a bounce back next week. Or next year, we're just going to draft defenses and kickers.
Exactly.
That's all that matters.
Dude.
And by the way, you thought it was terrible for these pass catchers. I didn't even include the guys that left early because of injury or illness. Maybe the face of fantasy football gets hurt yesterday, and he was on his way to about a 50-burger. He had played like 4 snaps and had 6 fantasy points already. Next thing you know, I look up and Jayden Daniels out of the game.
I know, and we were watching games in the war room, and there was like this collective groan because so many people in there play fantasy football as well. And plus, for real football, I mean, it's just been exciting and fun to watch this young quarterback develop. But he leaves with a rib injury, and of course, if you know quarterbacks who've had rib injuries across the years, this could be, if it's broken ribs, could be a multi-week injury, rib cartilage, something like Justin Herbert had, which took a couple of months for him to get better. Here's the good news. Jayden Daniels came back and was on the sidelines in the second half, even though he didn't play, laughing, chatting with his teammates, not looking like someone in a great deal of pain. And that actually matters when you're talking about rib injuries, because when they're severe, they are so painful that it hurts to take a deep breath. It hurts to move. Laughing's out of the question, and typically they would have kept him in the locker room. So although there's no specifics and we are told that he's going to have more follow-up today, of course it's Monday, and typically when players who have injuries get additional imaging, follow-up examination, it sounds like they dodged a bullet, so to speak, but also just protecting their investment, that if he's got an injury, we're not going to put him out there when he's vulnerable to take more hits.
Well, especially not when Marcus Mariota is doing what he's doing against the Carolina Panthers. If that's not a reason to start everybody that you have against the Carolina Panthers, I don't know what
He looked
is.
awesome. That was like, I felt like I was watching
happy for
Oregon
him.
Marcus Mariota yesterday. He
Yeah.
was just great. And so there's no silver lining for Jayden Daniels getting hurt. And it sucks. I mean, what are you going to, you have no idea. Obviously, you're playing him. He was on his way to a mammoth day yesterday. Truly, it looked like maybe like quarterback 1 type performance from Jayden Daniels was on the way. If you have another pass catcher or a running back in the Commanders offense, though, you did reap the benefits still. Like, you did not get a dud. Like, we've seen quarterbacks leave the game, and then all of a sudden a player like Terry McLaurin could be rendered completely useless. No, McLaurin was excellent once again yesterday. Brian Robinson Jr. gutting through that injury was awesome once again yesterday. Zach Ertz, 4 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown. So my hat goes off to Marcus Mariota for stepping up in place of Jayden Daniels. We are going to give you a couple of names, not just tomorrow, but later on in the show today, because there are some quarterbacks that are all of a sudden trending up right now. That if Jayden Daniels is unable to play next weekend, it's way too early to know that. We'll have some options to potentially fill into your lineup. The NFL right now is probably saying to themselves, we really, really, really want those images to come back clean.
Yes, please.
Because next Sunday, the NFL has already moved the Commanders game to the 4:25 window against the Chicago Bears. Jayden Daniels, Caleb Williams feels a little different. And with all due respect to Marcus Mariota, they were not expecting it to be pick 1 versus pick 2 when it's the 2024 number 1 overall pick versus the 2014 number 2 overall pick. They want the 2024 1 versus 2. Everybody wants Jayden Daniels to get back soon. But just, I mean, on top of a disaster day for pass catchers, maybe the best quarterback in fantasy football gets you less than 6 fantasy points because he leaves early.
It's just brutal across the board. And for what it's worth, I had Tank Dell as my start of the week. I just want to say this. He had 0 fantasy points.
Was that yours?
Yeah, it was mine.
Oh, we did double tanks.
Yeah, that's what and I didn't understand.
Field had the only good
When I
week
looked at
this
it, I was like, how is this even possible? It's like, oh, CJ Stroud had 81 passing yards.
81.
81.
It was so weird. It was
for
like
CJ
a collapse of the
Yeah, I don't get it. By the way, I'm absolutely crushing you in our Deontay Johnson, Tyreek Hill rest of the season board bet for what it's worth by 0.4 fantasy points because they were both awful this week.
Deontay Johnson.
Everyone was a loser in this one.
We'll react to this if it actually happens. My spider sense went up yesterday afternoon, and we've got 15 days till the trade deadline. I'm starting to think that there's a low chance that Deontay Johnson is a Panther beyond the trade deadline.
Man, I'm going to hope that happens.
Think Kansas City could use another
I think they could absolutely use
I
another
don't think
wide
they need
receiver.
anyone.
No, Stephania.
Stop.
49ers might.
Well, let's talk about your big takeaway from Week 7,
Yes.
Stephania. Where do you want to go with this?
You know what? I specifically picked a positive storyline
Right.
because I
Finally
was
got
so
one.
depressed by what happened in fantasy football yesterday that I took a real story, and that is my huge takeaway of the week. It is Nick Chubb returning to football. This was fantastic. Look, 11 carries, 22 yards. He got in the end zone, and if you were watching, it was like they were determined to get Nick Chubb in the end zone. I talked about that on Fantasy Football Now. I said if they get down near the goal line, they're going to try and make this happen for him because it's such a feel-good story after him being out for so long with that multi-ligament knee injury. Now, he only played 30 snaps, and we had projected that he would have a lower volume of work. He only had 1 carry in the second half. And Kevin Stefanski was asked afterwards about this and said there was no setback. They just didn't want to put him in a bad spot. Hooray, Browns. This is what we wanted. We wanted to see him get out there and get comfortable. I thought the fact that he ran up the middle, he did not shy away from contact. Not that you would expect it because he's Nick Chubb. But after that knee injury, to still be out there playing the way that he is accustomed to playing, ground pound, get in the end zone. Like, to me, that was the heartwarming story of the day. And I was just so happy for him that after all this work, he got back out there and got a touchdown.
He did, yeah. They worked very hard to get him that touchdown, and he ends up with 10.2 fantasy points. So for now, running back 21 on the week, not terrible. 2 games, of course, left to play tonight. Don't forget, doubleheader.
That's right.
ESPN Plus exclusive, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Will Mike Clay stay up past the first quarter? That remains to be determined. But a big doubleheader, Ravens, Bucks tonight to kick things off, followed by the Chargers and the Cardinals from L.A. later on.
Let's talk about a couple of studs from the Week 7 spot. I mean, we started out with real negative for a lot of things. Let's find a couple of guys that did real great here. And Field, Tank Bigsby, you called it. He was your start of the week. He was one of my props that popped for an anytime touchdown, so he paid off for both of us.
Do you get twice the money when he scores 2 touchdowns?
You only if you do a 2-touchdown bet. I wish it worked out that way. But, I mean, he was awesome. His second game over 20 fantasy points, and he took advantage of a Patriots run defense that we expected him to take advantage of.
Let's focus in on 2 parts of it. I think the second part might be even more pertinent for future running backs. Tank Bigsby's a good player now. He leads the NFL in yards per carry amongst running backs that qualify. And if you're asking me what the qualifiers are, guys, I know it's early on in the season, but the bottom line is there's like a couple of players who have 1 carry, so they're going to have more rushing yards on a per carry basis than Tank Bigsby. He leads qualified runners in yards per carry this season. The guy has been terrific on the ground. He's playing a lot of snaps with Travis Etienne out. Etienne obviously did not play yesterday.
Yep.
Way too soon to tell on week 8, but wouldn't surprise me, by the way, if Bigsby is playing a whole lot more even when Etienne is back. This is a team that's desperate at 2-5, needs every positive performance they can get. We'll file that away for next week. But the important part might be play your running backs against the Patriots.
Yeah.
And they play the Jets next week. Like, obviously, you're playing him, Breece Hall being him in this case. But like, the Patriots can't stop, and they can't stop anything right now on the ground. In the past 5 games, at least 150 rushing yards in all 5 of those games. I think now 10 rushing touchdowns in those last 5 games allowed as well. They're a disaster. The Patriots are a disaster in a whole lot of ways. The stars were so obviously going to align for Tank Bigsby on Sunday in London because the Patriots are they're bad on the ground as a defense in general, but also they're not good enough. They're going to play a lot of games where they either have the lead or our team is or be close enough to like make this a competitive game. Teams are going to gash the Patriots on the ground. Massive day when your team has a running back against the New England Patriots. It's just the way it could go right now.
RB5 right now. With 2
RB5.
games left to be able to play for Monday Night Football, so he was absolutely fantastic. And he wasn't the only one. Brian Thomas Jr. absolutely crushed. Dude, we've watched this rookie wide receiver come on and do some amazing things so far here in his rookie season.
I feel like he's the most underrated, or kind of the one that flew the lowest under the radar of wide receivers performing at the level he's performing at.
Yeah, it was the top 3 that we were talking about, right? It was all about Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze.
Yeah.
Those were like the 3 guys we talked about, and Brian Thomas was like the second fiddle of those guys.
And maybe because we thought they would be using some of their other wide receivers differently, but Brian Thomas has certainly emerged. 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games. He had 5 catches for 89 yards and a score. Yesterday, even carried the ball a couple of times, and he just looks the part. I mean, I think that's the thing, and the confidence may be developing a little bit more between Trevor Lawrence and him because he knows he's going to make the catches.
Yeah, I mean, he's got 20 or more fantasy points in those 3 or 4 games you mentioned where he has a touchdown. He leads all Jags wide receivers in snaps, targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Like, he is the guy that is the number 1 pass catcher in this Trevor Lawrence-led offense.
No doubt. And my Jaguars fans that are out there that we interact a little bit with on Twitter or follow me on Twitter, like I follow them on, I see the discourse right now. It is obvious what's taking place right now in Jacksonville. There's one wide receiver who's the real deal, and there's a couple others there that are playing way too much. And Gabe Davis playing way too many snaps right now, but they paid him 3 years, $39 million. I know why they are playing him quite a bit of snaps. It's got to be the Brian Thomas show going forward.
Yep.
I believe another wide receiver who could be traded over the next 15 days is Christian Kirk. Which makes too much sense. Even at 2-5, they get a win yesterday, but I don't think this team is going to find its way back into the playoff push. Christian Kirk does make a decent amount of money, so the Jaguars would have to pay down some of his salary to facilitate a trade. But because we've already seen 2 teams make a move, right? We have already seen Amari Cooper get traded, and of course Devontae Adams get traded. The teams that have not yet made their wide receiver move are going to have to be more aggressive, right? They are no longer realizing the first mover's advantage. So if you're Kansas City, you lose another wide receiver yesterday. At some point, the options are starting to get slim. San Francisco, a team that needs to win this year, all of a sudden has a very different look to its wide receiver room. Christian Kirk a name to monitor. Brian Thomas Jr. should continue to go up and up.
Wasn't Christian Kirk the one who was traded, like he was an early, or was it in free agency that he went to Jacksonville? Wasn't he like somebody who kind of set a bar of making more money than we expected?
The wide receiver market
I'm trying to remember.
Loaded.
Yes,
because
wasn't
Christian
he
Kirk
was
got
the
$18
trigger,
million.
right?
Yes, and at that time, people were like, there's no way Christian Kirk is making that kind of money. Little did they know that within like 18 months, Christian Kirk would make 50% of what the top paid wide receivers now make, which they deserve their money. But
he was sort of the catalyst for all of that.
The Jaguars were aggressive, often in free agency. They may have read the market fairly well there with Christian Kirk, right? Like, perhaps it was an overpay, but, Christian Kirk, I thought was excellent the first 2 years with Jacksonville, especially that first year, right?
It really paid off the first year, and then it feels like it's almost like he's a forgotten player. He would have had a score, by the way, yesterday if he'd had the second foot inbound. So at least
he's a good player.
There was one. I feel like he belongs in a better situation.
I would agree on that one. We'll see. Jacksonville, I don't. If I'm Jacksonville, I don't want to be fooled by what happened yesterday, like getting a win in which you were down 10-0 to the Patriots. The Patriots, by the way, snapped a 59-game winning streak in which they had a 10-point lead at any point during the game. 59 straight games. There are some issues right now.
They're trying to
in
figure
New
some
England.
things out. One thing that
One of them is not an issue, though.
I was just going to say, so I want to talk about the other side of this game because throw out the actual NFL record and what the Patriots look like, when we're talking about from an NFL perspective. From a fantasy perspective, Field, has Drake May moved himself into, if not a streamer, a potential starting conversation in fantasy?
I think Drake May is going to have some weeks where we're talking about him as like the 10th or 12th quarterback on our board. I really do. So he's played 2 games, obviously, as a starter. In those 2 games, he has at least 19.5 fantasy points and got the job done in 2 sort of different ways. Last week against Houston, yes, it was kind of garbage timey, but he had 38 rushing yards in that game. He did have 3 turnovers, but he also had 3 passing touchdowns. Yesterday, he goes 26 for 37, 276 yards, 2 touchdowns, only 18 yards as a runner, and yet he has a better week for fantasy. He's quarterback 4 on the week. The last 2 games, Drake May is tied for 3rd in the NFL in passing yards.
Wow.
Tied for 2nd in passing touchdowns. He's 6th amongst quarterbacks in rushing yards. There might be something to it here. Now, the Patriots are going to play a lot of games in which they are playing from behind. That's good news. Upcoming, the schedule does seem like it could be a bit daunting. They play the Jets next week. But how much of a daunting matchup is that after what we saw last night, right? Like,
does not.
It does not feel quite as daunting as it was last season, where it was like if you're playing the Jets, you stay away. In back-to-back weeks, and obviously Josh Allen's a stud, but Josh Allen put up over 24 fantasy points last week. Might have been just under 24 because he took some knees at the end of the game. And then last night, Russell Wilson, highest scoring quarterback in all of fantasy so far this week against that Jets defense. A lot of injuries right now in that Jets secondary. That's a huge part of this calculation.
Yep.
They play the Titans the following week to the Patriots. So it may not be these next 2 weeks in which you're saying to yourself, all right, we're all in. We're playing Drake May as our starting quarterback. But there's something here that could be pretty interesting because We are going to have 2 separate weeks with 6 teams on a bye. None are on a bye next week, but those bye weeks are about to get voluminous from weeks 9 through 14. Drake May could be an intriguing streaming option and maybe even work his way a little bit further up the ladder. If you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, you should be very excited about Drake May as one of your
prospects.
quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely you should with what we've seen from him. This is one of those things where you got to separate the fantasy from the reality, right? Because the Patriots in general, when we look at it, like they've just not been great. But for everything that we expected, you mentioned him utilizing his legs. What did you say he is in passing yards per?
Over the past 2 weeks, he's tied for third, I think, with Geno Smith.
Who's he throwing the football to? Like, why are we not getting those guys involved in our fantasy?
Hunter Henry has entered the tight end.
That's fair. That's
Hunter
fair.
Henry.
Hunter Henry's been excellent over the past couple of weeks. Other than that, though, it's like a smorgasbord.
Yeah,
It's
he's
just
just
mix and match, right?
Yeah.
Anybody available, they get a target.
You know, I might go try out for the New England Patriots, see if I
You
can
might
maybe catch
get
a
a
couple
job.
passes. To be honest,
Yeah, you could.
Let's talk about another guy that was absolutely amazing here in Week 7, Saquon Barkley.
This
I mean,
makes my heart happy.
this dude is still the king in New York. I was bummed the way that I heard like the Giants fans respond to him.
Shout out
It's
to-
not like it's Saquon's
Yeah,
fault.
shout out to Jason Kelsey for taking to the interwebs
I
and
agree
defending him. And I thought that was awesome. And he
Yes.
was basically saying, look, I understand that you're upset that he plays for the Eagles. I mean, he just went through the whole thing. He's like, look, they train the kids on booing when they grow up
When
in
they
Philly.
grow
like,
up,
I
yeah.
understand this, but it wasn't the frustration should not be generated at Saquon himself. And look, this makes me happy because I am thrilled to see a running back who is on a different contract, getting paid. At least, I still don't think the value approaches what they're really worth, but he got paid to go to Philly, and the Giants were not going to pay him. And this whole notion that you're washed up when you're into that second deal, and Saquon proving that's just not the case. I mean, even though they know that he's going to be a focal point, and even though the Giants know the player and know how to approach defending him, he still
They can't stop him.
put up over 100 yards total.
17 carries, 176
almost
yards
200.
on the
Yeah,
ground,
it's
and
the
a
second
touchdown.
most rushing yards in the game ever for Saquon.
And the season
He was
high
awesome.
for him.
Yeah, how about this? Saquon yesterday had 68 more total yards than the entire Giants team.
Wow.
It was incredible yesterday. He's been awesome, fountain of youth. And by the way, this day could have been a whole lot better. Jalen Hurts had 2 one-yard rushing touchdowns.
Yes, he did.
I actually thought that Nick Sirianni might just give all of those to Saquon. Like, kind of like stick it to the Giants
He
sort
can
of.
be petty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's got some
got
petty in
petty
him.
in him.
And
He
Saquon,
definitely
by the
does.
way, and Nick Sirianni talked about this after the game, was talking about how he was made aware. There's always somebody up in the box who's got kind of their eyes on notable statistical achievements. And when Saquon's creeping in on a career-high rushing day, someone's telling Nick Sirianni, hey, he's X number of yards short. He ended up 14 yards short of his career high for rushing yards. But after the game, Sirianni said that he went to Saquon and said, dude, you're right there. Like, if you want this, you tell me, we'll get it. And Saquon said, let everybody else eat.
See.
That's a Barry Sanders mentality
You know?
right
Yeah,
there.
that's
I
right.
love being able to hear running backs that don't mind spraying.
And
around.
yet he still produced for his fantasy managers. It's not like, he
RB2
took
on the
a
week.
knee.
Yep,
It's not
he's
like
awesome.
he did things to hurt you. 26.7 fantasy points, running back 2 right now. Again, so if Derrick
know what's
Henry
crazy?
passes him, it's RB3.
I want to say this. He is, like, he leads all running backs in scrimmage yards so far this year. He's averaging a ridiculous 6.1 yards per carry. 6.1 yards per carry. That's unbelievable. And all of this, with what he's been doing in fantasy, is with him being 19th in receptions and 24th in receiving yards. He's actually not getting all the passing game work that we watched him get in with
He
the
was the
Giants.
only thing going.
I know.
Yeah.
And they don't need to utilize that. And he's still absolutely mashing here as a top 5 running back for
We
everyone.
talked about the sort of the two opposite forces with Jalen Hurts never throwing the football to the back.
Yep. We saw it last year with DeAndre Swift.
And it hasn't mattered, right? Because if you go look at the yards before contact numbers for Saquon Barkley this year, I kept saying, like, Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry went from, like, trying to navigate traffic to being the only person on the track.
Yes.
Right? That's what it must feel like for them because they played behind terrible offensive lines. Now they're playing behind great offensive lines. They're great players, too.
Yeah, well, one of the arguments in the preseason was Jalen Hurts, all the goal line touchdowns, that's going to go to him. But I think there's also a measure of self-protection. Jalen Hurts got banged up last year.
Yep.
And I think having someone like Saquon who you can have confidence in when you get down in the red zone area, I think that made it so that it was easy for Jalen Hurts to give up some of that share to Saquon. And clearly, he's thriving in that offense.
He's been thriving. He's not the only running back thriving in a new offense, though. Field Yates, holy smokes, Joe Mixon. I was not expecting this from Joe Mixon in Houston. Can I say that? I don't mind being one of the people that maybe got it wrong because what he has done.
Who got it right? If you got it right?
I have no idea.
The Texans?
Did you have him as the best running back in fantasy football?
I
or
didn't.
like close to it?
I didn't. I don't know who did, but I didn't expect 25 or more fantasy points in all three of his healthy games so far this year.
26 or more to make it
Is it
even better.
26 or more?
26.8, 27.2, 26.4 fantasy points in each of the 3 games played so far this season. He scored a touchdown in all of them. He has 100-plus rushing yards in all of them. I'm telling you right now, he's better than he was in Cincinnati by a lot.
Yes.
Looks like it.
I don't know what the heck happened. Bengals fans out there, Texans fans out there, if you can figure it out, let me know. But Joe Mixon, even without that elite passing game volume, is absolutely crushing it right now. And I'd have to go and check, and I haven't done this research yet, so this would be a good thing to check in on, is that, remember like for a while, the Chiefs, when they got down to the goal line, they would never run the football. They'd always throw the football, and you'd look up, and their lead back would have like 2 rushing touchdowns the entire season. I wonder if the Texans are the opposite way. Like 10 yards and in, part of the reason why C.J. Stroud is struggling is lack of passing touchdown production because he needs to be at the top of the heap to be a fantasy top-end starter because he doesn't run at all. It feels like the Texans, all their touchdowns come on the ground, it feels like. All of them. They all score on the ground. And that has been the case.
Unless it's Nico Collins running from me, and we haven't seen him because he's been out on IR.
Man, they really missed him yesterday, huh? But yeah, I mean, Joe Mixon, fountain of youth. I mean, until further notice, like, you can't rank him high enough.
By the
Again,
way,
it's the revenge tour this year.
came back from that ankle injury, and if anybody was concerned about how he would be coming back from that,
Not concerned
really
anymore.
showed no rust, there was no setback whatsoever. He came out of the gate. He looked good last week. He looked just as good, if not better, this week. Pretty impressive.
How about this? Just think about this right now. If you're doing rest of season running back rankings, I think these 5 guys are somewhere in the first 8 to 10 picks. Derrick Henry, obviously.
Yes.
Saquon Barkley,
Obviously.
obviously.
Yep.
Joe Mixon,
Obviously.
Aaron Jones,
He's been awesome.
and who were you talking about a second ago that I've forgotten already? Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara.
Yeah. Oh, he's been.
We were not talking about him. He had a down game on Thursday night,
Yeah,
obviously, but
one.
still, Kamara has one down game. Like all
passing
5
game
of those
usage is
guys
probably-
are players who are cast, fairly or unfairly, as like towards the end of their career as far as elite rushing production. All of them are kind of defying it right now. So impressive stuff from all of them. Stephania smiling wide. There are other names, Breece Hall, Bijan, etc., Jahmyr Gibbs, that would be in that conversation as well. But those 5 guys, the old guard, getting the job done.
Yeah, of the top 3 running backs going into your fantasy drafts, only one has really produced in the way that you would hope for, and everything else can be considered a value. I mean, look at where Derrick Henry, look at where Joe Mixon went. I actually drafted him in the War Room League, and we were, a ways down. I think we took C.D. Lamb first, or I don't even remember. But anyway,
You
ended
had
up
C.D. Lamb,
yeah,
I think you had the
C.D.
second pick? Third pick?
Fourth pick.
yeah.
C.D. Lamb with the 4th pick, 16-team league. So that tells you where I got Joe Mixon. Got him on the 2nd.
Wow.
And Joe Mixon has probably been the highest scorer on my roster.
yeah.
Per game basis,
Absolutely.
yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. He was awesome yesterday.
Do you think these guys listen to the podcast just so they can stick it to Mike Clay? They're like, yeah, tell us we're old one more time, Mike.
Well, Joe Mixon, remember when he got hurt, how pissed he was because he said I was the rushing
right?
leader in the
Yeah.
league. So I do think he's got something to prove. Like he was itching to get back and clearly didn't miss a beat.
All right, let's talk about guys that haven't missed a beat. Russell Wilson, holy smokes. This guy just came out of
He
nowhere.
wouldn't give a saying at the end.
No,
I was
he
like, you
wouldn't.
see
I
it?
saw
I was
that.
so
I know. He
wanted
needed
it. I
something.
wanted it.
Steel
but
City.
264 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, plus 3 carries for 3 yards and a rushing touchdown, 24.8 fantasy points. QB1 so
That's
far
like
on
a
the season.
fountain of youth.
One game, he is QB1. And if you told me that he was QB1 without being able to do more with his legs, and I know he got in the end zone, so that's 6 fantasy points. That's great. But he was able to find everyone in this offense. He elevated everyone in the Steelers passing
He
game.
did, but I will say this, just my 2 cents. He did have some amazing help. George Pickens was
He did some good
spectacular, made a
stuff.
couple of big catches. Pat Fryermuth made a ridiculous catch. that helped.
Brooks.
So, I would still say, like, yes, he can throw the deep ball, but a couple times it looked a little like, okay, Russell
were kind of
Wilson's
50-50 balls sometimes, it
Yeah,
looked
I
like,
would
yeah.
say. So it was great because I think, you know what my takeaway is on Russell Wilson? That I will never, and I hope nobody ever questions anything Mike Tomlin does again. I mean, the whole reporting of how there were a lot of people who were not necessarily in favor of this decision, even in the building.
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin sure came out looking like a genius when they put up that effort against the Jets.
Yep.
And Russell Wilson gave us reason to believe that he can navigate that offense that the Steelers want to run.
He's unbelievable. And
By the way, I know the Jets are not the same level of defense that they were last year, but that's an impressive
still.
first test to pass for Russell Wilson.
100%.
A dominant 22-point win.
Not taking sacks. Big deal.
Loved it.
Yeah.
George Pickens looked like a young me out there catching passes from Russell
Yeah,
Wilson
a
a
young
couple
you.
years ago. That's right.
Like a young man out there.
All right, let's give a couple of quick shout-outs. We're going to be real quick here with these ones, but a few other guys that had some nice games. How about Amari Cooper? Only played 18 snaps, but he saw 5 targets, including an end zone target. Only wide receiver to see an end zone target from Josh Allen. Didn't have a single pass that was off target as well for what it is
I know,
worth.
he was stunned by that.
Yeah, he was. It was like, how do I wait? All of these are just going to come to me. This is amazing. So I'm super pumped to see what he's going to do in this Bills offense. Like, shout out to both Amari Cooper in real life and the fantasy managers that rolled the dice on him being in a new spot because 16.6 fantasy points. Fantastic. Shout out
Shout
to
out
Amari
to
Cooper.
Keon Coleman for helping him know the route to run that. Like, that's a team player.
That's right. That's right. Stephania, you got a shout out as well.
Yeah, Josh Jacobs, who, can you believe this? That he had his first receiving touchdown. He's running back 14 on the year now. So, he's not maybe as high up as you were hoping. But so far this week, I think he is running back 11. So we'll see what ends up happening with this. Not a ton of yardage, but more targets this week than in previous weeks. So I think that's helpful too. Obviously, you see him on the ground, but I like the fact that he's catching passes as well. He's only had one down week. That was week 3 against the Titans when he had 5.8 fantasy points. Otherwise, it's been double-digit performances from Josh Jacobs for the rest of this year.
I'm old enough to remember when there were concerns about Breece Hall, when he had back-to-back not great games. Well, I want you to put the word out that we are back up. Breece Hall, the best Jets passing game option right now. He had over 100 receiving yards last night, 6 catches for 103 yards, plus 12 rushes for 38 yards and a touchdown. Get this, and hat tip to our buddy J.J. Zacharyson, a late-round quarterback on Twitter, who noted that since the Jets play caller change, Breece Hall has seen over 80% of the Jets' rushing share.
Wow.
Plus over 20% of the Jets' target. Talking about a workhorse role there for Breece Hall. 26.4.1 fantasy points. Actually only tied for 4th amongst running backs so far this week. That's a monster number to be just 4th amongst running backs. He was awesome. The Jets wide receivers, not so great. Devontae Adams saw 9 targets last night. 3 catches, 30 yards. Better days, hopefully, are ahead for this Jets offense. They draw the Patriots next Sunday. Breece Hall probably will be RB1 on the board.
Hey, how about David Njoku as well? 14 targets, had 10 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown, 23.6 fantasy points, ran more routes in this one than his previous 2 games combined. He saw 3 end zone targets, 2 from Jameis, 1 from DTR. Obviously, Deshaun Watson left this game early. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. But I really think that he could be the Travis Kelce of this offense, the potential #1 pass catcher in Cleveland with the way that he has been absolutely unbelievable at the tight end position. Shout out to David Njoku for carrying fantasy teams here in
Yeah,
Week
and
7.
he had a significant high ankle injury that he was coming back from, so I think that's also a reflection of him getting healthier. How about Kenneth Walker? Is it the third?
On his birthday,
Kenneth Walker the third.
Stephania.
Yeah, happy birthday. But also, what illness?
Yeah.
What illness? Because I didn't see any signs of illness. Did you? I mean,
I think he was in sicko mode. I think that's what the illness was.
Nailed it.
14 carries for 69 yards and a score, 2 catches for 24 yards and another score, so he can do it through the air on the ground. 23.3 fantasy points, running back 8 on the week right now. Breece Hall passed everybody, by the way, last night. He missed weeks 2 and 3 with an oblique injury. Did you guys remember that?
I do.
Yeah, and he came back and had that crazy pretzel flip where he got torqued and showed no ill effects from the abdominal
Against my
injury.
Detroit Lions, thanks.
He has had 20 or more fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. His lowest production, by the way, in that 4th game, 14.6 against the Giants.
boy.
So, listen, he's been like set it and forget it with him.
Yep.
We like the idea of Zach Charbonnet as something, but I think when Kenneth Walker is healthy, there's really not much of a role at all for Zach Charbonnet.
Kareem is right now hunting for fantasy points.
I see what
the
you did
Chiefs
there.
just continue to rely on Kareem Hunt. They can't seem to throw the football very well these days, but they sure can run it. Kareem Hunt yesterday had 24 combined carries and receptions. He is a top 10 running back once again this week as he found the end zone twice. He wasn't particularly efficient. It doesn't matter. The Chiefs don't need him to be. They win games because their defense absolutely mashes. But how about this? Over the past 3 weeks, Kareem Hunt is 2nd in rushing attempts, 10th in rushing yards, and tied for 2nd in rushing touchdowns. he had a bye mixed in there as well. He's been that good over the past 3 weeks, even despite the fact that he's played just 2 games. And also, shout out to the Chiefs' backup linemen who were on shade duty yesterday. Did you guys see this report by Aaron Andrews during the game?
Listen, I know that stadium very well. And that visitor sideline is scalding because of the way the sun shines in.
Yeah.
So they were protecting the linemen from the heat by having the backups stand in front and shade them.
Well, apparently you bring your own tents to opposing stadiums. I don't know.
There's all kinds of things they travel with, just like they travel with heaters and such.
Right, but they didn't bring any tents yesterday. So the backup offensive lineman just stood in front of Joe Tooney and Trey Smith and company.
That's amazing.
They got the job done. So those Chiefs backup offensive linemen, as far as I'm concerned, you helped contribute to Kareem Hunt's top 10 running back finish pending 2 games on Monday Night Football tonight.
I was wrong on Kareem Hunt. I said whether it was a breakout or a fake out, like especially after this second week in a row, he looks like a breakout here in fantasy
There's
football.
no one else left in that offense.
No.
It's the walking wounded right now. Travis Kelce had a quiet day. Juju Smith-Schuster left the game early. Sky Moore is out there, and Justin Watson. I mean, guys, like they're down to the nitty-gritty right now in Kansas.
Really are.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about a couple of duds from Week 7, just so that you guys can know. We're right here in this with you as well. Ramondre Stevenson was in a smash spot again this week.
Thought so.
Like we thought, I mean, this Jaguars defense cannot stop running backs, but he has been outside the top 35 in 3 of his last 4 games, including this one, where he had 7 carries for 18 yards, 2 catches for 7 yards, 4.5 fantasy points. Jaguars, coming into this game, had allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running back so far this year, and Field, things don't get easier. I mean, they play the Jets, the Titans, and the Bears as their next 3 games. That does not feel great if you are Ramondre Stevenson. Man.
Under
is not.
50 rushing yards in 3 of the last 4 games.
Gross.
Under 50. And let's just talk about the receiving here for a second. If you look at the receiving so far, he has 6 games played, does Ramondre. He's got 15 catches. 15 catches, which is fine. It's an okay number. Fine. 15 catches, but how about this? 44 receiving yards on 15 catches.
That's bad.
He's averaging under 3 yards a catch.
That's
So
Wan'Dale Robinson level.
He makes Wan'Dale look like freaking
Like a
AJ
deep-
Green in his
Yes,
prime right now.
exactly.
15 catches for 44 yards, no touchdowns yet for Ramondre through the air. So he's been a yo-yo player. He's had like 3 great weeks and then 3 dud weeks, complete dud weeks for you. So he's a hit or miss guy. The Patriots keep saying after they lose these games by about 20 points, we got to run the football better. We'll see whether or not they actually do that. They play the Jets this Sunday. You can run the football against the New York Jets, but the Patriots better get things going right now. They paid this guy $36 million this offseason. Why pay a running back if you're not going to get the most out of him?
Yeah, it just doesn't feel good when you can't get it done against the Jaguars and that run defense. But ideally, hopefully better days are ahead for Ramondre Stevenson. Tough outing here in Week 7. Stephania, I just want you to know, no one had a worse start of the week than I did with Tank Dell, who got 0 fantasy points. But you and Mike also were super in on Tony Pollard.
We were, and if you look at the stats, 16 carries for 61 yards, like horribly inefficient. However, I want to point out, before he left the game, because he left after he got hit by Teron Johnson in the neck and the head and had to go for a concussion screen, 7 carries for 42 yards. So not as inefficient, but then when he came back, he was far less efficient. He was cleared to return to play. Just not a great day for him. I just kind of throw that in the round file.
Yeah,
it was just one bad week.
It felt extra bad to me because there was no Tajay Spears. We knew he wasn't going to be back there. So it was Joey Chestnut. Yep. Joey Chestnut was only on the field for 8 snaps. This was the Tony Pollard show. He saw 18 touches and still couldn't get it done against a Bills defense that was giving up 5.3 yards per carry coming into this game. Just a letdown.
Okay, so I don't like to do this. But I don't believe Joey Chestnut played 8 snaps.
I'm sorry. Julius Chestnut. Did I say Joey Chestnut? That's my fault.
Moment,
That's
when
my
you hear
fault.
something, you're like, I think I've heard that name before.
I think I saw Joey Chestnut hanging out with Big Cat in Bloomington over the
doing
weekend.
some food reps over there.
Legends,
in
but
addition
that
to-
was
Julius Chestnut.
Yeah, but
that is my fault.
Tony Pollard had 16 of the 19 running back carries.
Yeah, I mean, that was.
I do think that I do think there was something to him leaving, though. Like I said, the inefficiency was much, much worse when he came back, and he didn't touch the ball much either.
Yep.
So
Wasn't great. That
Throw it
offense
away.
just didn't look
Throw it
great.
away.
in
The
general.
duds are hard. I mean, these duds are hard because of the smash spot you think the player
Right.
is.
Yes.
Right? They do. And so we'll see whether the Bills, whether that is a a turnaround game for the run defense. I am not convinced of it, but definitely a dud for Tony Pollard yesterday.
Didn't feel great.
Yeah.
Another couple of duds that came here. The Giants running backs in
Wasteland?
general.
Oof.
were just-
Wasteland?
Well, Devin Singletary
Feels like it.
only played 12 snaps. Remember, he came in with a groin injury. He missed weeks 5 and week 6. He comes back. We knew Tyrone Tracy was going to share work, but only played 12 snaps did Devin Singletary, and Tyrone
that
Tracy
make
had
you-
37 snaps.
Does it make you think it's still an issue with the groin?
Yeah.
Okay, because the only reason I ask is because he was off the injury report entirely. So I
Yes. Well, I mean, I think it's one of those where you're not as efficient as you should be. You're maybe not as explosive. Like maybe you're not getting treatment anymore.
Right.
You're not injured anymore, but you're still not yourself.
It
don't.
felt.
So go ahead, Daniel.
It felt to me like, and tell me if you guys think that this is off base, but like, there is a chance that if this had been a closer game, maybe we would have seen more Devin Singletary. But the fact that it was a blowout, what's the point in bringing a guy back
Right.
just to give him more reps than what he needs? Like when you're already getting crushed. Like that's the thing for
Yeah.
me. Like when I see a guy coming back from injury and the team is playing poorly, I know you want to get him some run, but like
Meaning
don't
Singletary?
overexert. Yes, meeting Devin
Well,
Singletary.
only 12 snaps, so it wasn't like it was a ton of work.
Right. So that's why I'm saying. Is that
so
why
you're
they
saying that
limited?
maybe,
That's
so-
maybe
yeah,
that
okay, gotcha. You're
it was-
saying like it'll start
right.
to equalize a little bit.
And they may have planned on limiting him to some degree without even calling it. You know, it's not always a snap count. Sometimes it's like a conversation
Right.
with the player and how they're feeling as they go.
Kind of a roller coaster too, because these can prove to be worth their weight in paper. But in pregame warmups, Devin Singletary was running with the starters. He got announced with the offensive starters for the game.
Really?
And then Tyrone Tracy ends up starting the game. Eric Gray was playing early. Just a thought here. I could be way off. My gut tells me as Singletary gets a little bit stronger, he'll still be the 2 to Tyrone Tracy, but it'd be more like 60-40
I was going to say 1A, 1B.
as opposed to like 75-25.
Yeah.
I think that's where I could see it kind of equalizing. Giants fans are out there saying like, Devin Singletary stinks. I hear you. He's not great. He's not great. But it's not like Tyrone Tracy lit the world on fire yesterday.
He did
right?
not.
Under 4 yards a carry for Tyrone Tracy. He averaged 0.1 yards more per carry than Devin Singletary. He had 3 catches for 9 yards. That's
Yeah.
good for 3 yards a catch. Devin Singletary had 1 catch for 3 yards. These guys were both comparably efficient, so I think this ends up being more Tracy than Singletary, but more like 60-40 as opposed to 75-20.
I see it the same way, Field. This team trailed the entire game. Their quarterback got benched. The entire offense played poorly. They had 105 passing yards
Yeah.
in this game. Like when they
Bad game for everybody.
Everybody, including Malik Neighbors, unfortunately, that was rough for
Yeah,
everyone.
he had 0 catches in the second half.
Yeah.
Not great.
Not great at all. And
Not great,
Could
Bob.
Drew Lock time be coming at some point?
Yeah.
Ooh,
Speaking of not great, here's another guy. I want to mention this.
No, this is bad.
Kirk Cousins has been in 2 smash spots over the last 2 weeks. Took on Carolina and Seattle. Do you know where he finished against Carolina? Quarterback 20. Do you know where he is right now against Seattle, who also was in a smash spot? Quarterback 20.
With 4 quarterbacks to
bad.
play tonight, by the
Yeah,
way.
I
We
know.
Yeah.
think conservatively 2 of them
Right.
will go over that number.
Why were we too optimistic on Kirk Cousins coming out of that 500-yard passing game, Field?
You know, we talked about it after last week's game because while he was bad as far as fantasy is concerned against Carolina, they scored 5 offensive touchdowns. Like you'd probably say to yourself, if I knew they were going to score 5 offensive touchdowns, I would play Kirk Cousins, not knowing how that 5 touchdowns would break down. Would it be 1 passing, 4 rushing, 4 passing, 1 rushing, or something in between? It's been bad. It just has been. It's just been terrible. And the interceptions were backbreakers yesterday. Yes, one of them was a late Drake London drop that ended up falling into the breadbasket of Julian Love. But with Kirk Cousins, you need precision passing, no turnovers, and lots of touchdowns.
Yep.
Yesterday, not precision passing, 2 interceptions, and 1 touchdown because he had -1 rushing yard. So, yeah, tough day at the office once again for Kirk Cousins. I got burned last week in a league with Kirk Cousins. I started them again this week in that exact same league. I think I'm going to end up being okay because of a couple of other guys who carried the weight. But, yeah, that's been tough. Like, put it this way, going forward in that league, I will not be starting Kirk Cousins. As a 6-point passing touchdown league, I will find a different option.
I got so lucky coming off the waiver wire. Rosie asked me, should I add Geno Smith this week or Kirk Cousins? And I was like, you know what?
Geno Cousins.
I'd probably go with Geno this week. And, like, it wasn't that much better, but, like, I still was
He was much better yesterday.
I thought so too. I feel like that Falcons offense as a whole is really hard to read, and there's sort of this play down to the competition kind of thing, or what they think the competition's going to be until they turn out to be something more. I mean, how could they be so solid, against
they throw it
Tampa
a ton,
Bay?
which is good, right? They do throw it a ton.
Yep.
So
He's
you got
like
that
an
going.
old C.J. Stroud, right? Where it's like he doesn't run the football. He's going to have touchdowns. And
I
when
don't
he
think
doesn't
he's
have
got
touchdowns-
the gun that CJ
No.
Stroud
I'm
has
just
to
saying,
get
like,
it
from a
down the
quarterback
field.
perspective, C.J. Stroud doesn't run. Like, we need him to have multiple passing touchdowns. He's got to have a good passing day. Like, that's the same kind of thing. And you would think, like you had said, if you told me that they scored 5 touchdowns, it's like, yeah, sign me up for Kirk Cousins. He probably has at least 2 to 3 of them. But
All right, did not happen.
gotta
Another
limit the
monster day for Bijan, by the way. Like, talk about special talent, man. Like, I know that there was
finally
those
seeing-
2 weeks where it was tough for Bijan and Breece Hall, but guys, like, the reason why those 2 players were drafted, likely in the first 5 picks of your draft, is because of what we have seen over the past couple of weeks.
Yep. He's tied for 3rd amongst running backs in targets, which is fantastic.
He's
A
awesome.
ton of
He's
passing
just a
game
sweet
work.
player.
He's just been unleashed.
Love
Finally.
that. 4th game over 100 scrimmage yards, but just his first game with 100 rushing yards in this one. He's been getting it done a little bit of different ways. All right, Stephania, let's talk about a couple of injury updates and start at the
terrible.
quarterback
Must we?
spot. Yeah, let's start with Deshaun Watson because it looks like we see him being done for the season.
Yeah, I think, look.
It's all but official, right?
Yes, and I think it's getting closer and closer to official. So many people who saw the injury yesterday, people have become quite good at this observational analysis. And when you see Achilles tears, and frankly, I think we're seeing them more frequently. We certainly haven't seen them in quarterbacks like we have recently last year with Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins and now Deshaun Watson. The team confirming, Kevin Stefanski confirming after the game that indeed he tore his Achilles and it appeared to be season ending. Mary Kay Cabot, who covers the Browns, does an exceptional job, said it's not a question of if he's having surgery, that she sourced it, and it's a question of when and where and who's going to do it. Interesting note from her reporting was that he would plan on talking to Aaron Rodgers about his procedure and, what he experienced. Deshaun Watson had shoulder surgery last year with Dr. Neil Elatrosh in Los Angeles. That's who operated on Aaron Rodgers for his Achilles. So I would not be at all surprised if Deshaun Watson found his way back to Los Angeles and underwent a similar procedure and rehab course there, which is to say that, look where we are. We're in mid-October. Certainly reasonable to think he could be back. Kirk Cousins made it back, and he had not as an aggressive rehab plan as Aaron Rodgers did. So it's really a question that the return of Deshaun Watson is a multifactorial thing. And I'm just saying from the injury perspective, his availability should be fine for the start of the year.
Kind of feels like if we get Jameis Winston under center, we might be able to unlock some of these Cleveland Browns skill position players that we've been waiting to see more from this year, especially with no Amari Cooper. That target tree is even more condensed.
So just a couple of takeaways from yesterday's game. Worth noting that Jameis was designated as the 3rd quarterback yesterday. He was only able to enter the game because Dorian Thompson-Robinson got hurt, finger history. So we don't know whether that issue will cost him time this week, but we are staring down either Jameis or DTR starting the rest of the way. Cedric Tillman had 8 catches for 81 yards, saw a ton of targets. David Njoku saw a ton of targets as well. They were trailing, but this just in. The Browns are bad. They're 1-6. They're going to be trailing quite often. Their defense has not been nearly as dominant this season as it was last season. I don't want to be a jerk. It sucks. It really sucks for Deshaun. For fantasy purposes, this might result in better outlooks for the pass catchers. It's just a fact.
For our game. For the game that we play.
Fact. David Njoku last year was excellent down the stretch with Joe Flacco. We saw Amari Cooper have some monster days down the stretch with Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco is obviously in Indianapolis now, but wouldn't surprise me if our outlook is rosier week in and week out for David Njoku. Maybe Cedric Tillman proves that yesterday was kind of sticky. There's something to it. Jerry Jeudy, stepping into that number 1 wide receiver role yesterday, had 1 catch for 17 yards. I think I've been down that path enough times to feel like I'm not going to go back down it again.
I need to see it before I trust it again.
Long ways away, but sucks for Deshaun. Hope for a speedy recovery or a successful recovery here that has him back on the field to begin next season. It's a quagmire to say the least for the Cleveland Browns. They a very complicated quarterback contract and performance situation just became that much more complicated, but sounds like we'll see him again at some point in 2025.
Stephania, let's talk about, unfortunately, your player, Brandon Ayuk. carted off the field. What happened with him?
If you didn't see the play, he got sandwiched between two defenders. And, I always explain to people the knee is the most vulnerable point in the lower extremity because the foot is typically planted. But you have a lot of motion at your ankle. You have a lot of motion at your hip. You don't have a lot of motion in your knee. So when you got force coming through the lower extremity, especially two different directions, the place that's going to fail is the knee. And Kyle Shanahan acknowledging that they feared a torn ACL is possible for Brandon Ayuk. Look, it could be more than that. It was an ugly-looking injury, and it was upsetting when it happened. And obviously, the players are shaken up. They've been dealing with a lot with Christian McCaffrey out. Deebo Samuel then wasn't there yesterday because of an illness that got worse during the pre-game warm-ups and ended up costing him playing the entire time. And now Brandon Ayuk, who finally, it looked like, was connecting with Brock Purdy after struggling in the first couple of games that he played, appears to be done for the year.
So Deebo Samuel should be in line for a significant workload week in and week out. George Kittle had a great game yesterday. He'll be very, very busy. Ricky Pearsall will be discussed tomorrow on the waiver wire. We'll see whether it's a Jacob Cowing or somebody else emerges for the 49ers. I don't have hard and fast information here, but if you told me the 49ers made a trade at some point over the next week, I wouldn't be stunned. They have a win-now window, right? They want to win this season. I'm going to say some of the things that I said with Deshaun Watson about Brandon Ayuk. A complicated contract and performance situation with the player became that much more complicated because I think there were a lot of people who follow the league very closely and understand how the cap works, who felt like after this year something was going to happen with one of these receivers. You can only pay so many players when your quarterback's going to start making $55, $60 million a year as opposed to $800,000. But this complicates it. It sucks for Brandon Ayuk. It's been a very, very weird season for him, and it just becomes very disappointing.
I want to ask you really quickly, Field, Ricky Pearsall, first-round pick. In spite of the fact that they already had 3 really good pass catchers,
They knew where this
31st
one was
overall
headed, right?
pick. Came out of Florida. What can you tell us about Ricky Pearsall and what he did in college?
He's big. He can freaking fly. He's a great athlete. We saw him yesterday a little bit. I'm not going to read too much into his first performance coming back after being literally shot 6 weeks ago.
No, in the report, they were talking about him just being able to get his arm overhead recently because it was up high near his shoulder. So it legitimately was not just, vital organs recovering, but part of his ability to catch a football.
Yeah.
One of the best athletes of any wide receiver in the entire class this past year. Freaky athletic ability. Excellent player both at Arizona State and Florida. Played with Jayden Daniels early in his career, but a different version of Jayden Daniels. Goes to Florida, kind of has average to below average quarterback play for a lot of it. So didn't see the best of Ricky Pearsall consistently because of the passing game around him at Florida, but a good player who I think will have a big seasons in time for San Francisco. I'm not sure this year is the year that I'm buying it, but I don't think him going 31st overall was like a total shock to the system. I think that was like probably the early portion of his range, but he was somewhere between the 30th and 35th best
And
player.
Juwan Jennings, who's been incredible for them, was out yesterday with a hip injury. So
He'll be busy as well for sure.
Yeah.
Going forward. Has to be, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Has to be.
Has to be.
Unfortunately. All right, Stephania, that's not the only wide receiver. It was just an awful week in general. We said this right off the top. Another wide receiver also carted off the field with an injury.
DK Metcalf left in a cart to the locker room, but Coach Mike McDonald said later his quote was he banged his knee a little bit, and the injury doesn't look too bad. Now, this is one where I really want to hear what happens on Monday when they do the evaluation, because obviously there was a fear that it was something a little bit more significant. Sounds like they're hopeful that it wasn't, but this is one of those more tests as the week goes on, and we'll see what happens.
I don't know this is the specific reason, but it was noted to me again by somebody who knows these things that there are a few stadiums in the NFL where the visiting locker room is the visiting bench is very far from the visiting locker room in the examination area. So if you're dealing with a lower body injury, if it was at the home stadium, could you have walked there? Maybe. But you've got, 300 yards as opposed to a 25-yard walk. Perhaps they say, let's just get you on the cart and not worry about it.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll see where they say, oh, some players headed to the locker room, and you see them literally they're going a few feet and down some stairs, and the tunnel is right there. And even when they get in the tunnel, there might be one of those little carts that can drive them inside the tunnel.
Sure.
But if you're on the opposite sideline, you're very far away, it takes a while to get you in. They might cart you there just to make it more efficient. So, good point.
If for some reason DK is not available next week, the Seahawks play the Bills. Old Faithful, Tyler Lockett will probably enter the conversation.
Yeah, he
once
will.
Again. And,
Gotta love him.
Lockett, man, I know, and we had a conversation about him a few weeks back versus Jackson Smith and Jigba, and the numbers, like some of the sort of the underlying metrics may have said, like, it's JSN all the way. I am a believer that not all targets are created equally, right? And it just feels like Geno Smith throwing the football to Tyler Lockett is a better bet than a lot of quarterbacks throwing to a lot of wide receivers in general. So if DK is back, then Lockett remains what he has been, which is usually just like a sort of like a 12-team, 3 wide receiver, third wideout / strong flex option. But if there's no DK Metcalf, I think that number goes closer to like, wide receiver 28 or 30.
Gosh, that's frustrating. That's really frustrating, in part because you love DK Metcalf. We're going to hope that he is okay. There's no problems there. And two, like, we were really excited about JSN and being able to come out and, like, break out here in his second season.
I was a big proponent of that.
I mean, we really thought, especially with, and I said this a bunch of times, coming into the season, new offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, coming from Washington, all the things that he does in the passing game, the way that he utilizes all these different pass catchers. He had a bunch of great wide receivers that he played with in Washington as well. It felt like the stars were aligning for us to be able to see JSN really take the next step. And instead, kind of feels like he's in a similar situation that he was. Like, he has taken a step forward, but a similar situation that he was in his rookie season.
Sort of.
Yeah, I mean, he's out there running.
Step forward, yes.
Yes.
But, like, still, like, man, like, 3
Not,
for
not what we were hoping for.
Not at all what we were
the
hoping.
game. I got to check the game. I want to check the game log. I know we have to go, but, like, just start talking. And I'll get to the thing here for.
Yeah, let's look up one more negative thing for this week. The week 7 is the week of negativity, unfortunately.
JSN has 4 games out of 7 with 10.3 or fewer fantasy points. He has 1 game with more than 13.1 points this season.
Yikes.
He's a really good player.
He's
He's a really good player.
Anyways, yeah, he is. It's welcome to fantasy football, everybody.
That's right.
The land of crazy frustration.
Land of broken dreams.
Hey, fantasy basketball is officially underway. If you want to
Celtics,
draft a fantasy
baby.
basketball team, I
know.
believe the association kicks off on Wednesday. Is that
Tuesday
correct?
night.
Tuesday.
I believe the
Tomorrow
first
night.
game is
Yep.
the Knicks against, I forget who won the championship last year.
Okay, Field.
I don't know.
All right.
You guys
I don't
get
know.
your
There's
moments.
this
You get to wear your
New
Jake's.
England
You're right.
team. That's
Listen,
right.
you're
right,
right.
right,
Listen,
right.
all right, we don't get to, we only
No,
win
listen.
championships like every, like 18 months, so we have to brag
Do you have,
about
do you have a lot of
Oh,
Celtics on your fantasy team?
I do. Yeah, I
Yeah.
drafted 3.
3?
Yeah.
Oh. Are they any good?
Yeah, Derek White, he's pretty good. Peyton Pritchard, and who else did I draft? Oh, Sam Hauser,
Oh, okay.
3-point
Nice.
specialist, yeah.
Nice.
3-point specialist. I have a guy named Steph Curry.
Yeah. Sam Hauser would be slightly less prolific
than
as a
that?
3-point shooter. However, still an excellent 3-point.
Yeah, if you want to go sign up for fantasy
We're ready
basketball,
to
you
start
can do so right now.
talking
The
stuff
game
about
is
our
open.
fantasy hoops.
Dude, I'm ready for it. I'm ready to be able to come out there. I'm going to give Adam Schefter a run for his money this year. He's been crushing it in our fantasy basketball league, so we'll see
You
how
should
that
really
works
do
this
some
week.
work or something.
Yeah,
I
right.
know, right?
That guy's
Photo.
always just got too much free time on his hands. Hey, when we come back tomorrow, we're going to recap both of the Monday Night Football games. We're going to dive into more injury updates as we get a little bit more from the teams and the waiver wire.
Send me my lineups right now for fantasy basketball.
Do it.
Yeah.
Don't forget, today's show is presented by Boost Mobile. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself.
2
Good luck
football
on Monday Night
games
Football.
tonight. 2.
Dos!
Yes.
We'll see you guys tomorrow.
One on ESPN Deportes.
Good luck staying up late. Have some mushroom coffee to stay up late.